Well, how about Lewis? Lou, are you up for example?
Yes.
To do that?
William Carlos Williams.
Adrienne Rich.
Probably don't need to say much about him. We know so much about him, except that he was a physician, and he was a general. He was a family doctor. In those days, they were just called a GP, general practitioner.
And I'm sorry, can you tell me the connection with William Carlos Williams? The poet is, of course, Adrienne Rich.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm way ahead of myself.
Yeah.
What I read this as is a poem at the death of a person, and the person is William Carlos Williams.
And he died on March 4th, 1963, and this was written in November of 63.
Well, and this is my bad, I think, by producing November 23rd, 63. That was the date of publication in Nation magazine.
Yeah.
But one does surmise that most likely was referring to something that happened in 63.
And it was William Carlos Williams' death in March of 63.
Yeah.
March 4th.
Well, and
So, let me read the poem then. I kind of went ahead of myself here. Can I read it then?
please.
Sometimes you meet an old man whose fist isn't clenched, blue-white. Someone like that old poet whose grain palm once traveled the bodies of sick children. Back in the type line was room for everything. The blue grape hyacinth patch, the voluntary touch of cheek on breast, the ear alert for changed heartbeat and for other sounds too, that live in a typed line. The breath of animals stopping and starting up of buses, trash fires in empty lots. Attention once given returned again as power. An old man's last few evenings might be inhabited, not by a public, fountains of applause off auditorium benches, tributes read at hotel banquets, but by reverberations the ear had long desired, accepted, and absorbed. The late poem might be written in a night suddenly awake with news.
As when a searchlight plays against the dark bush tangle and birds speak in reply.
Just my thoughts on it. William Carlos Williams was not a bitter old man. He was a quite human person, quite immersed in humanity. And so that's the reference to somebody with a clenched blue-white fist. And he was a true physician in the sense that he really cared for and was very close to his people and to the families of his people where he practiced. And the mention of putting your ear to the chest was especially interesting to me, in that if you've ever had to examine a child that's crying and it's upset and all, if you put the child in the mother's arms and she holds it and calms it down, and while she's holding the child, if you put your ear to the baby's back, you can hear its heart very nicely, and you can hear the breathing of the baby very nicely. If you take a stethoscope towards the baby will panic. The baby does not like the idea that you're going to put a stethoscope on it.
Yeah.
But if the mother's holding the baby and you put your ear to the baby, you can hear pretty well everything that you need to hear. So that's very sweet that she puts that in this poem. And then there's the idea of the sounds, other sounds that might be heard, and then the kinds of things that the type line is his poems. The type line is William Carlos Williams' poetry. It's the metaphor for his poetry. And certainly sounds and colors and ordinary things, flowers, were very were central to his type of poetry. And then the old man's last few evenings really are his old age, his approaching death of his approaching end.
I almost read this next stanza as a contrast to Robert Frost being celebrated, one of his significant birthdays, his 80th birthday, and had a banquet and such.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
I think that might be a really good observation.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's certainly again a metaphor for important public people and how they often are allowed at the end, or when they retire. When you retire as CEO from Westinghouse or something, you get one of these things. You get a big party in an auditorium and perhaps an orchestra and the whole thing. William Carlos Williams wasn't going to ever be involved with that kind of thing. It just wasn't who he was and the kind of life he led. So this was a contrast, I think, showing a different kind of old man than the man with a clenched blue-white fist. And then I searched, one of the things I did is I wasted a lot of time searching for his poem with the hyacinth in it. I can't find the poem where he actually cites the purple hyacinths. I thought maybe she knew the poem and was citing it, but...
Or the starting up of buses.
Yeah. Well, that you can, he lived in the city and he heard all these things.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he incorporated them line for line in there, but certainly this was his material. This was what he used when he wrote his poetry. And then at the end, I questioned what he might have heard in 63 that was new to him, as opposed to things that he'd heard all his life. One of the things I thought was the sound of the ICU, which I'm sure by then they were just beginning in 1963 to have ICUs.
Intensive care units.
Yeah, where people that were very sick were concentrated, whereas before in the old hospitals, if you were very sick, you just got put in the bed on the end of the aisle near the nursing station, perhaps to get a little more attention, but you didn't get that much special care. And then post-operative rooms became the thing where after your operation, instead of going back to the ward, you went to a room where people could concentrate on watching you. And then to ICUs where very sick people were taken care of. I don't think he had that in his practice, but he might have at the end of his practice heard the bells and the buzzes and the noises that are unique to you.
Interesting.
You know it at all. An ICU is a very eerie place just to sit and listen to. It's scary. Perhaps he heard that. Perhaps he heard the first transcontinental jet airliners going as I was sitting this morning out in my yard and the plane took off over, and that's a sound that your parents never heard and that I didn't hear until I was in college. Now you hear it everywhere. Can't get away from it. In the top of the Sierra Nevada mountains you hear.
Yeah, you do, the Sierras, for sure.
So he might have heard that. Although these might have been the sounds that at the end he might have incorporated into his poetry before he died.
Fascinating.
Anyway, that was my thoughts on this poem.
That's great. I took those last lines as when a searchlight plays against the dark bush tangle and birds speak in reply. On the other side, I thought that...
Yeah, here they are.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if the searchlight is one's attention. If you focus your attention out and you look, you're going to hear. You look and listen, you're going to hear the birds. What we seek, we find.
Mhm.
The other thing that I noticed was the ear used during the exam. In the fourth stanza, there's a reference there. But later we hear, by reverberations, the ear had long desired, accepted, and absorbed. And then, so the reference to ear in both places can't be accidental. And perhaps it refers to how his practice as an MD informed him and his overall humanity, and was part of who he was as a poet.
Almost the antithesis of the women's hearts in the last poem.
Oh, yeah.
Which is to say that if the experience of using your senses to listen for the heartbeat of a child.
And you're referring to about eyes.
Has,
the violet.
yes, has a much different impact on your core sentiment.
This also is something that this poem brought to me, and that is, in modern medicine, the ears are not important anymore.
Ah, interesting.
I was taught all kinds of patterns to listen to for heartbeats. And with those patterns, you could diagnose different diseases of the heart by simply listening to the rhythm and the sounds called murmurs in between the beats. And there were distinct patterns for distinct diseases. Nowadays, I don't like, and the cardiologists, I guess, still listen to you. But the MRI, the EKG things, all the technology now makes listening.
And the senses they use are touch, to pound on the keys,
Yeah.
and eyes to look at the screen.
There are two other aspects, at least, of this poem that maybe we should touch on. Midway through the poem, there's the stanza, trash, fire, and empty lots. But then, attention once given returned again as power. So again, the word attention. Well, the first use was my description of the last stanza of the poem, but here it's very direct. And do you think the meaning is something like, once you focus on something, what you get back is like a magical power, or an awareness of what's going on that you wouldn't otherwise have had you not focused?
And you might write poetry and become renowned for it also.
Yeah. He was excelled at observation, which good physicians are also, at simply watching, listening, and observing what's going on. And he was able to take his observations and turn them into powerful poetry.
And he was one of the early imagists.
Yes.
That movement.
And one of the best.
Yeah. Well, the other aspect of the poem that I think we would be remiss if we didn't address is the title. For example.
Yeah. And I guess we're missing Adrienne, talking so much about William Carlos Williams, but she's an excellent poet.
Yeah, known for, among other things, feminist theory, and the importance of that in her life and work. But see, so maybe it's, for example, sometimes you meet an old man, almost as if the old man is the example. Right.
I think there's a gender comment here. I don't know how far I want to take it, but that you might have a stereotype of an old man that isn't terribly off the mark, but William Carlos Williams exemplifies a different, more humane, more grounded male.
Someone whose
prototype.
fist is not clenched.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Well, that's good.
And I think as a woman, you know, she would be more attuned to that.
Well, so the adjective grained, you know, someone like that old poet whose grained palm once traveled, and I was, you know, grained, trying to get a sense of what that word is doing there, but it's sort of like perhaps a hand that's been used a lot.
Well, he's an old man now.
Yeah.
She's talking about him as an old man. And my palms are grained. I don't know about yours.
What does that mean? Grooved
Well, it's
or
a
wrinkled?
contrast to a clenched blue-white fist, you know.
Oh, and it's open.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and shows wear, but
The grain is age.
yeah,
He's an aged palm, which once traveled on the bodies of sick children.
but is open and is.
Sure.
I think that's brilliant.
And then the voluntary touch of cheek on breast. Why voluntary?
Well,
The
that's-
voluntary freely given by the patient?
Yes, because in the old days, before even stethoscopes, for hundreds of years, physicians were putting, the only thing they could do, if they wanted to hear what was inside you, was put their ear to you. And there was a very Victorian ritual that went with this. You had to ask the woman to undress, and she did that someplace else so you couldn't see it, and then she had this gown on, and then you would ask permission, and maybe another person would be in the room to make sure that everything was okay, and then you put your ear to her breast to listen to her heart, and it was a ritual. But it was important. And then a Dutchman invented a cone.
The stethoscope.
Yeah, right. And he put just a cone, a paper cone in the first days.
Oh,
and he
I see.
put a paper cone into his ear, and then put it in her ear, and then he didn't have to touch her flesh with his
Oh,
ear.
interesting.
And then that developed into the stethoscope.
Which arose out of his Calvinist upbringing.
Yeah, right.
One thing I liked was, but by reverberations, which is sort of, for me, a musical reference, that the ear is hearing the reverberations of the life force of the cosmic dance reverberating, and this is what is more important than public adulation, that the ear desires to hear that cosmic sound, for what that's worth.
The quiet
That's
new sounds,
a very good observation.
the quiet new sounds, the birds speaking in reply.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
That goes very nicely.
As opposed to the Trump crowd screaming.
Yes, lock her up.
Or perhaps screaming children and hospital noises that he had to do every day.
Sure.
The beauty of just a bird.
Mhm.
This is great. Thank you. You were just the right person to lead us in a
Thank you, I
discussion.
really enjoyed it. And
Yeah.
she did such a, this is, I mean, it could be a Benetti funeral. Beautiful, just beautiful.